I am Keith McDonald. I'd like to invite you to a new series that I'm putting on for the Toronto Public Library. It's called Building a Better Human Being with AI. AI, of course, artificial intelligence. And we're going to talk about how this thing that we're calling AI, which is actually a multiplicity of things, can actually improve our lives as humans. Next episode is September 14th at 7 p.m. Go to literacyAI.com to find out all the information you need about registering. See you then, I hope. Welcome to the premiere episode of Keith Chats, brought to you by Literacy AI. We're coming to you live from the Literacy AI studios in the East End of Toronto, although you're seeing this on tape, no doubt. And tape is a bit of an antiquated word, isn't it? Anywho, I'm Keith McDonald. I'm your host, and today's guest is going to be Abby Seneor, who's coming to us all the way from Barcelona, Spain. We're just waiting for Abby to come online. And we're going to talk about, among other things, AI and consciousness. Hope everyone is conscious as they listen. So stand by for that. Coming right up.
Hello.
Hi there. So good to
Hi.
see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
So how are you this morning? Actually, it's afternoon, isn't it, for you?
Yes, it is 3 p.m.
3 p.m. Oh boy.
What time is it for you?
It's 9 o'clock in the morning.
Not bad.
No, not bad. I'm just waking up. Yes, it's really, really good to meet you finally in person.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the first time I came across you was in the Go Open Data conference, and I watched it like in not continuously. And I remember a few things that you said which really struck me. Um, I couldn't recall the exact quotes, but it was around AI and the need to have more human involved. And I was like, I think I need to speak with him.
Oh, that's fantastic. That might have been the lightning talk because I've been experimenting with this concept of building a better human
Yeah.
through AI. And this was the first kick at the can. Of course, the lightning talk is very short, right? But I wanted to see if I could at least get started with kind of a narrative. So, yeah, I really think we can
Yeah,
build a better human.
we can. And in fact, there is Eric, I can't remember his name, but he wrote the book Deep Medicine, and it's around how you use AI in medicine. And what his main claim is AI will make us better human, because when you go to a doctor now, what happens is, let's say you have a 10 minutes appointment, they will spend 8 minutes in looking at your files and checking the fact, and then 2 minutes to actually talk to you and be human. So what will happen with AI is all these 8 minutes that you spend in analyzing and diagnosis, AI will do that. So you will have the whole time actually be a human and speak with the other person. So I think when you said that, it really resonated with me because I really like this concept and I like this idea.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, actually. It's funny you should say that because uh, I've got a ear, nose, and throat doctor that I go to. Actually, I did some sinus cleaning. And every time you go, in reception, they give you this sheet and they've got all these questions, how do you feel? Are you breathing okay? And so on. And I've started to answer kind of off the charts, like, oh, extreme pain, etc. And they never cover it. They never deal with it, right? So I think it's almost, I don't know why they do it, because if they're not going to look at it, why are they doing it? And I think you're right. If we had, let's say, an AI, uh, whether it be a robot or something like that, that actually speaks to you, would that make it any better, where the physician actually then connects with that and he might say, oh, alert, alert, he's saying he's having trouble breathing, as opposed to a sheet of paper that they put on a clipboard that the doctor doesn't look at. I think it could be better, right? Because you'd get this connection more than a piece of paper. And if they don't really have to have a real person. It could be someone who, like I say, is a robot of sorts. And I think that's happening in some places.
It does, yeah. I think we need to let machines do what they're good at, and this is analyzing vast amount of data and processing it. And we should do what we are good at, which is probably connecting to other people or being conscious to our environment. But when you said building better human, this is what you are referring to, or you had something else in mind?
Well, I think it's yes, it's bigger than that, though, of course, right? Because I think, as you mentioned, let the AI do what it's good at. Because AI right now can be very, very good at specific tasks, and so that could mean everything from, let's say, labor type work, loading boxes, that kind of thing. And what it should do is give us more time to deal with each other. And if you think about even in education, a lot of things could be managed through AI, and then the teacher would be freer to circulate and discuss and have conversations about conflict and why do we get angry? Whereas the AI could go through math, what is 2 plus 2, right? You don't necessarily have to have the teacher involved to that degree. I also think things like calculators, this is where it gets a bit radical because everybody I presented this to kind of goes, oh, wait a minute, you can't stop teaching math. And I was saying, well, think about it. Even spelling with spell checks and grammar checks, I think it's funny because it hasn't really improved over time, actually, and it could be better. Like you have context that seems to be missing. So from and form can often be let go as not a problem, where in context it doesn't make sense. You meant from, but you type form. So my point is, with AI, we actually may get to a point where we really don't need to cover that, but we could devote more and more time just on the people side of it, understanding each other, cultures, just getting along. And the AI might then help us with, like if we're writing a composition, it can check and it could actually teach you as you go. And it could be vocalized, right? Wait a minute, Keith, you've typed this. Do you know what the meaning is? And we don't need then the human being to do that as often or as much as they used to. Because at least here in Ontario, we always hear about reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it seems every few years or so they go back. We got to go back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. And how's that working for us? I would ask, right? And I don't think it's working for us that well regards to our human interaction. And if anything, it's getting worse, partly because of social media. It seems that everybody undercover of, let's say, an account and just a name on an account, they seem to be quite mean to each other. And it's black versus white, right? It's always an argument. And I'd like to see AI assist us in mediating that and drawing attention to it and helping us resolve it. But that's difficult, right? I think it is, because how do you design an AI that isn't biased one way or the other? And I know you've talked about bias a lot.
I do. I mean, just back to your point, and because I love philosophical ideas around AI, I mean, will it be possible in a few years, or maybe even now? I'm not really talking to you, I'm just talking to an avatar of you, a deep fake, and we have some sort of really intelligent system that mimic your voice and asking the question. So it might be possible, and maybe in 5, 10, 20 years, this will happen. And we will not have a way to distinguish between the real cave and this avatar. I mean, it will be some sort of a philosophical zombie of you, but how do you know? How do I know? I mean, you will know that it's not you, but how will I know?
It's a really good question. And, thinking about work and everybody that's so busy. Oh, I'm so busy. I wish I had several of me, right? You could actually do that. Well, I'll send Avatar 1 to this conversation, and Avatar 2 can go to that one, and I'll go to the actual meeting live. Yeah, I think it's a really relevant question. And to me, do we really want that? I mean, if we let it go and happen, it's going to talk about game changer. And then what would you have to schedule meetings then with all the different avatar keys and clarify what happened, and or do I plug myself in and somehow access? Because that's the difference really between AI and human, right? Because theoretically you can load all that stuff up in the cloud and all the different avatars could get it immediately, whereas it's a little harder for us to plug ourselves in and get all that information instantaneously.
But in the end, there is just one real Keith, and that's the one that will have the conscious experience of being Keith, and all the other will be philosophical zombies of Keith. Now, to you, it will be clear. To the people, like, if I will not possibly know if I'm speaking to the real you or to some zombie Keith, but you will know.
That's
And
true. But how would I know what we talked about? Like, how do I get that information back to me at home base?
well, you can either have a video recording like we do now, or you can upload this content into your brain, or you can have it transcript. I mean, there are many other ways that you can recall what happened, and the real version of you will sync all the instances. But I mean, it's a really tough question also when you talk about things like immortality and brain uploading. It's okay, we might, there are many theories around consciousness, and like consciousness is a topic that I have, I don't know, since a very young age. I was fascinated about the brain. I wanted to be always a neurosurgeon because I wanted to solve this mystery. And until these days, I'm not entirely sure what exactly it is. There are so many theories and they are fundamentally different from each other. But in the end of the day, I do believe, and it's my opinion, is that consciousness is about experiences. So we can have a computer that will perfectly mimic conscious behavior, but it will not replace the real thing. It's like if you have a computer that can simulate gravity, it can be a perfect simulation, but it will not suck me into this black hole. So if you have to have, a coordination system, and on the x-axis you have intelligence, and on the y-axis you have consciousness, the thing is, we think that the more complex, the more intelligent we are, the more consciousness emerge. But this is true to humans and mammals, but it's not true with system. Like Alexa in 20 years might be more intelligent than us. It can fool you and me. People might fall in love, the hell situation, but it will not have consciousness because it will not have this experience of what, if we go to Nagel paper, what it is like to be a bat, which is the simplest version of how to explain consciousness, what it is like to be Keith, what it's like to be me, what it's like to be a bat. So yeah, I think it's I know it's controversial because if you take, like, I think it's not Daniel Dennett, for example, he doesn't believe in qualia, and for him philosophical zombie are perfectly fine concept. And then on the other hand, so it's like with consciousness you have three main, like, you can divide it into, there are many theories, but you can divide it to materialism, and then you have dualism, body and mind, and then you have panpsychism, which is basically say that consciousness is not something that emerged from information. It's not something that is separate like body and mind. It's something that is intrinsic, right? You're born and you have consciousness. And with this theory, even plants and stones have consciousness. Like there are some version of this idea, but some of them would say everything in the world, even the universe, is conscious to some degree. So yes, a stone have very low level of consciousness, and a human much more complex, but they are all conscious to some degree.
It's fascinating when you start to try and figure that out. Like, for instance, does a stone feel pain?
Mm.
And, you know, if a stone could talk, what would it say? I think the variety of people's interpretations of that is really difficult to pin down as a final truth, right? And I know that's what attracted me to you actually was the article that you wrote about that very thing. It was on LinkedIn. And basically you're reiterating that already, but the idea of consciousness is about being, intelligence is about function. And I think the mistake maybe people make is put human emotion onto things. That's true of animals, and it's hard not to, right? Because you can have what's observable as happiness. Why that dog is really happy? Look, he's running in the park and he's chasing after the ball, and I'm sure it is a form of happiness, but it isn't necessarily kind of the same as our happiness. And do they contextualize it as happiness, or is it just, you know, that's just what is at the moment, right? They're having fun. And I think when you start to bring that into, let's say, human form like AI, even going as far as to make it appear like a human with perhaps skin and perceived emotions and so on, but it is artificial. And how far do we want to go with that? Do we want to really attempt to create what you're talking about, like as a conscious being that is different than us, but it really does have emotion, it has memory, all of it that is like a human, or will it be not possible? And secondly, the big question is, do we really, really, really want that? Or is it better just to have like an Alexa that's, you know, sounds friendly and everything, but it's pretty clear it's not a real thing?
So all are very good question. I think it's all start with the definition, because for some people, Alexa is conscious already, because it all depends on how do you define. I mean, the big debate around AGI, artificial general intelligence, the problem is, to some definition of intelligent, we already have AGI. So it all depends, how do you define, like, how do you perceive as general intelligence? And it same goes to consciousness. Like, what does it mean that something is conscious to you? So when you have claims like, oh, AI is sentient, I mean, I strongly disagree, and I think it's complete nonsense. But I can understand that for some people, they perceive consciousness as something else. For them, it might be true. And this is, I think, the real danger, because you're asking how far can we go with it? And I mean, in my opinion, we can create something very, very intelligent that will surpass us. Like Alexa in 20 years from now will be super intelligent. It will not be conscious by any means. Like if you take Frank Jackson experiment, the Mary's Room. So the Mary's Room, it's a thought experiment. Like imagine Mary, a girl that she raised in a black and white room, and all she knows about colors is from books. And then she has perfect knowledge about colors. But one day she step outside the room and then she see the color red. And then at this very day, she learns something new. And this is the qualia thing. This is the experiment, the experience of seeing the color red, which is fundamentally different than knowing about the color red. So for me, Alexa, it can know a lot about red and colors and everything, but it cannot possibly have the experience of seeing the color red. But the problem is, to some people, and probably to the average Joe in the street, you can simulate conscious behavior, and then people will not be able to differentiate. So then you create a lot of problem around it, because how do you educate people and how do you explain them this behavior that seems to you as perfectly like human-like? It's not. And even now, so I mean, we can do that one day, but I was playing with GPT-3 and all these large language models. Even now, you can ask them, are you conscious? So, and they will answer your question that like, yes, I am conscious and don't hurt my feelings and things like that. So if one doesn't really understand how this system works, I can see how it can fool many people. And I think this is a real danger.
I agree. It's the fooling that worries me to a degree, and I think a lot of us want to be fooled.
Do
Um,
we?
yeah, I think so. And another segment on the series that I'm doing is play and health and also conflict. And I think when it comes to play, just even relating, there's a lot of people who may feel isolated and lonely, and I do think again, if we go as far with it as we might, I mean, affordability will be another question. You know, can you actually, purchase a companion? For some people, it will be affordable. For others, it won't. But yeah, I think there might be a desire to relate to the non-human human. Um, and what worries me too, as an aside of that, is the idea of servitude. Are we creating, let's say, beings that would be servants, and they do our bidding, whatever we ask? And then if we go further than that, what if they reject that and say, I don't feel like doing that today, Keith? What do we do about that? Because we purchased this thing that's supposed to, not ask us back or talk back to us. And to me, that's a bit of the risk with going too far with it. And I'd like to see us be very uh, walk before we run, and very decisive about what it is we want. That, though, is very hard because there's such differences, cultural differences. I mean, if you take China or Iran or the United States right now, if you talk about ethics as well, everybody there is going to have this a different version of what is truth, what's reality, what's desirable. How do we bring that all together into a one world kind of scenario so that we don't create different things in different countries that do different things? Wow, that's so hard, I think, to get us cohesively working in the same direction. What do you think about that?
First, I mean, back to your first point, how far should we go with it? In general, in AI, I think there is this notion that we can do it, so why not? And I always said, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. Yeah, we can do many things, but do we really need to do it? Is it really necessary? Is it really ethical? Or at some point, it will go out of our hand and we will not be able to control it? Now, back to your, I don't know, do we really need to have one unified truth or one AI system that will be true to everyone? I mean, we do have cultural differences, and maybe that's okay. Maybe there is no one size fits all. Like if you take the the mole machine experiment that was done by MIT, they took the trolley problem, right? So the trolley problem is you have one person of 5 people, and you have a truck running, and the truck will kill five people, but then you can divert the truck to kill one person. Would you do it? So there is no right and wrong to that question, and it really depends on your ethical beliefs, whether you are utilitarian, and then you will prefer like the one person because the happiness of the 5 people far exceed one, or whether you are virtual. So it really depends. But the mole machine, what they did, they took the trolley problem and they created 12 million versions of that. So imagine you can take the same problem and have, instead of one person or 5 people, you can have men or women. You can have dog or a baby. You can have a doctor or someone, just a worker. So there are many versions of it. And they created the trolley problem like as a game, and it randomized 2 options, and you have to pick. And then based on that, they gathered all the data, and they created what I call it cultural cluster. So they took all these 6 dimensions, which is like gender, species, age, and 6 dimension, which I don't remember all of them. And they created this cultural cluster that you can see in each country what people are more prone to. So I remember looking at France and the Netherlands, and one of them, I think it was France, can't remember, was very high in sparing women, which means they would high likely save women. So they were, I think, number 1 or 3 out of 117. And then the other country was toward the end. So, I mean, the reason I'm saying that, it gets to show that there is no, you cannot possibly have one size fits all, because we have different cultural clusters. So even, that goes back to your ethical and ethics. I don't know if, and that's just my opinion, yeah, I don't know if we should, and if it's right to have one code of ethics that will be true or that will suit everyone, because we are different and we have differences, and that is not on us, on anyone to decide who is right and who is wrong.
It's a good point. And I mean, I think when the conflict part that I'm going to be talking about is, would we be prepared to have like a black box as an arbitrator? We both go to the black box, outline our case, and assuming the black box is filled in with all of the information. So my bias goes in, your bias goes in, and the black box has to interpret all the history, analyze, and project a recommendation. But you're right. Do we really want that? Like, I think differences are important, and that is part of what makes humanity. But the difficulty with humanity is this: it's still in 2022. We've got like the war in Ukraine that's going on right now. And if you look at Russia, that experienced a very similar action from the Nazis in World War II, where the Nazis invaded Russia and all the devastation that occurred. And now it seems that Putin is behaving the same way. I want that territory. I'm going to invade. And is there a better way to mitigate that? And the UN doesn't seem to be capable of it, because the way it was structured in the origins of it is the veto, right? So Russia's got a veto, states have a veto, which basically means if they don't like it, they don't have to vote for it. Instead of saying, you know what, we're all in on this. If the majority in this committee says this thing is bad, I have to accept that. I can't invade. I just wonder how we can get there. And I do think it's really difficult because, as you say, every culture has things that have been since their beginnings. It goes back far, way far, and it becomes the norm. And just because our norm is different, do we force our norm on them, or do they force their norm on us? I agree. It's profoundly difficult, and to me, it goes to our brains that I think in an evolution context, AI is like going lightning fast. And we've been moving so slow. And in a way, our maturity hasn't happened yet that we could say, we need another way to resolve this. So back to the war analogy, Putin wants the territory back. The Ukraine wants to be independent. Now, how can we get together and figure this out? And that to me is the challenge. We have to be willing to do it. And I think a lot of times the people just aren't willing. They're entrenched, right? They're dug in. This is the way it has to be. And how do we break through our own brains to say, well, that's not acceptable? It might have been acceptable 400 years ago because we just didn't know any better. But shouldn't we be able to get that, right? And to me, AI might be able to crack that for us because in theory, it could be neutral. But so much of that is in the programming. And that's what worries me, because it seems to me you can't have data without bias. And how do you get there so that you can truly say, no, this is as neutral and as fair as it possibly could be? Because we had hundreds of thousands of people bringing content to it, and different cultures were represented, different sexes were represented. It's as complete as it possibly could be. And even then you might say, yeah, but you'll never quite get there, right? So is it an impossible challenge to make us better?
I mean, the problem that we have now in the world, I don't know if it's an AI problem or a power problem. And even if you will have the most sophisticated AI, it will not solve it. But the other question is, can we create this neutral truth? Well, if you think about Isaac Asimov, Three Laws of Robotics, I mean, you can use it as, it's very naive, right? But you can use it as a basic. We create an AI that, you know, a robot may not harm a human being, or it's similar to Aristo virtual ethics, which basically, can you create that being that is this virtuous person that will not cause any harm and will be fundamentally good and just want to do good or to be good? Now, it's a very nice thought to have, and it's a very it's an idea that kind of really makes me somehow optimistic. But how can we execute that? I don't know, because like according to Aristo, I'm not even sure that we have virtuous people nowadays. It's, you know, it's a philosophical concept which they are very nice in theory, but they really break when it comes to reality. And yeah, and on the other hand, but that's opening a Pandora box, right? Because if you ask me, the AI that we have now, this is like, it's not intelligent. What it does, it takes vast amount of data and it finds some patterns and makes sophisticated prediction. But this is not how, if we are trying to mimic the way human brain works or the way we learn, this is not the way we do it. You don't need to show a kid 10,000 images of a car and tell him, this is a car. No, this is not a car, and this is a car. So next time, you know, this kid will say, oh yeah, this is a car because I saw the others. But this is somehow how AI system working now. So imagine you have, oh, that's something interesting that I did. If you go on Google Images and you type man haircut, you see a typical stereotype of men haircut, you know, short hair. And our head of communication in the company, he's a man and he has slightly long hair. And he told me that he's somewhat being mistaken to be a woman because of his haircut. And when you go on Google Images, you can see why, because this AI trained on, I don't know how many images of men haircut. So we get these biases. So what we can tell is, okay, let's fix this algorithm. Let's now add more images of men with slightly longer hair. But then you will have something else that will come up. So it's like, it's a vicious circle because you can never possibly catch up with the next bias. Like, so there has to be, but again, I don't have the answer, but I do know that this is not the way to go, because if we really want to create an intelligent, really intelligent machine, we need something else that is probably not based on big data. And so there is a book that it's probably one of the few books that I read more than once, and it's 1,000 Brains by Jeff Hawkins. And he suggests a new theory of intelligence. And I mean, if anyone that is listening to that, it's a must-read book. And it's a very different from the theory of mind that look at the brain like, you know, you have input and output. And I think that if we will maybe try to go that direction, so he explained, I don't know if I can explain it well, but basically the brain creates reference frame of each object that you see, and it's not just an input and output. You have different parts of your brain that creating the same reference frame of that object, and then it makes prediction, but the prediction, it need to reach a consensus from all these cortical columns in your brain, and it adapts as you go and as you learn. And I mean, this theory make more sense. I don't think it's complete, but I'm not a neuroscientist, so by no means I cannot criticize anything. But I think it's a very interesting approach, and it's probably the way to go. if we want to create something that is really intelligent and is not based on vast amount of data. Because even like if you look at these large language models that they are based on huge amount of data and billion of parameters, the cost to train them is outrageous. And the impact that it has on like a carbon footprint and things like that. So I don't know if it's sustainable in the long run on one hand. And the second is what you said. It's like you have all these biases and they will keep popping up, because if it's based on data, and for the problem is it's not about the data that you have, it's about the data that you don't have. Because what if you have a bias towards something, but you do not have the right data to fill the gap? Then what do you do? So, you know, people are talking about we need to remove biases. I think we need to add more because maybe if you will have all of them, you know, it's like a black and white, like the absence of all colors is like so how does it go? The absence of all the colors is black and the other way around. So it's like if you have all these biases, essentially you have none of them. I don't know if it makes sense.
I think I know what you mean. And that's a really interesting way of putting it. Not enough bias. Because I think people, at least the people that I'm talking to, and even through the Go Open Data Association and so on, we're quite hung up on this bias. And when we first started the Open Data Initiative, it was around 2008-ish, and I was involved then with the City of Toronto, we weren't even thinking about bias. I mean, we were just, let's get the data up there, right? And so now, some years hence, we're worried about that. Like, is it been vetted for bias? And I wonder if AI itself could be, provide a bias alert. Thanks for all this programming, but I'm sensing a bias. And I do think we have to reconcile it. But you're probably right in the sense that we could never have an absolute perfect model that has covered all the bases. And again, maybe that's what makes us human. Because I think that's the key question. What is it that makes us different? And if we're trying to recreate us, I would ask the question, why? Why don't we create things that will assist us, and us, I'd include the planet, as opposed to all these diverse projects. And diversity is good, experiment is good, creativity is good, it's all good. But as we get further along the continuum of AI, we're starting to ask these questions. Is it possible for us to say in an answer, no, we don't have to go there? We could, but what's the value of that, at least in our time? And 100 years from now, someone may revisit that question and say, oh, now is the time for that. Perhaps we should do that. I think that's what appeals to me and also confounds me at the same time when we talk about artificial intelligence.
Interrupt this program for a test of the emergency AI alert system. This is just a test. If this were a real emergency alert, you would be directed to the nearest Tim Hortons or Shoppers Drug Mart for more information. This has been a test of the emergency AI alert system. We now return to our regularly scheduled program.
I agree with you. I don't see a point. Why do we want to create more of us? I mean, the world is already overpopulated. So, and also, what's the point? We are here. We might as well have something that help us to live better life and take some of the tedious job that we do that we probably shouldn't be doing. But why do we want? And that goes back to the point of just because we can do it, should we really do it? I mean, I do think that that we will achieve AGI, but I'm not really worried about it because I don't think, as opposed to if you take Roger Penrose, that in his view, consciousness is a quantum state, and once we will reach, once we will have better understanding of quantum computing, we might figure this one out, although neuroscientists don't really take this theory seriously. But there are some theories that think that consciousness will emerge the more the system will become intelligent and complex. I don't think so. So I'm not extremely worried about it. But let's say hypothetical scenario that we figure out how to create a being like us. Why? I mean,
That's it. Why? Our brains are beautiful and complex enough. Do we really need to simulate, model, copy, any word you want to use, this thing? Or can we not keep it as the most unique thing that we have?
I mean, I think it is, and I doubt. I think we will achieve AGI, but I don't think it will be conscious. And so I'm not really worried about it. But I mean, then you have the other side of the coin is, okay, you can create human-like intelligence, or you can create something like us. Or there is the other side, which is like, immortality and the transhumanism idea of we can upload our brain and our consciousness into a computer and in some way live forever. And I was a big fan of this idea for quite a long time, because I was like, yeah, I think that can be cool to somehow have a legacy form of me here that can evolve. But now I'm not exactly sure about it.
It's funny you should say that, because I talked about that on my first show, the AI of artificial immortality. And I know you've written about that as well on one of your posts. Can we, should we? And I'm still in the idea, yeah, it'd be great. If we could talk to Mozart now, for example, or almost anybody that you'd like, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a huge figure like Einstein or something. It could be your mom, right? Oh, and your grandkids could then talk to their grandmother or great grandmother, and have the experience of relating to them. The risk to that might be, though, that they think it's real, because again, it's artificial. But maybe it's okay if they think it's real. I mean, this to me is the complexity of the thing, right? I would go down as a communications guy. That to me, the need or the essence is the idea of communicating. And if one of the best ways to talk about my family history is to bring on the family who no longer exist, but they exist in this digital domain. That could
Well,
be
you
quite
can in a
fascinating.
way do that already, right? You have fakes and you have their voice, and you can do that.
Yeah, there's a new push on too for voices to use like people that have died, like your father or something like that. That's a bit creepy to me, actually. Hey, Dad, how do I find this route to wherever, and your dad's voice comes on. Okay, Keith, you take the. That would be creepy, and that's a different thing, I guess. But to me, that's another aspect of how people will want different things, right? And the multiplicity of options. And maybe I just have to let some of that go. Just because I find it creepy doesn't mean it shouldn't happen. Um, but you're right too. The whole issue of fakes, I think, is an interesting one, because fake it until you make it, right? So it seems to me there's this idea that sometimes it's okay to do that. But I would again ask the question, why? Is it that we can't do it in any other way? Like, I didn't record conversations with my parents so that I couldn't create it any other way except to fake it. So digitize a picture of them and somehow create, rather than sitting them down and recording their voices enough that we could have them say anything, right? Because it's only a few letters and pronunciations that you need to actually have them then be able to vocalize anything. But you have to plan for that, and you have to have a process. And I go back to the economics of it, which is another thing I want to talk about. Is it seems that our commercialization of everything is the push to do it, and I'd rather see that downscaled. It's okay to make money for sure, but if we're creating things just to make more money, is that the right motivation to do it? But I'm sure that somebody could start, and probably they already have. I haven't looked into it enough, but yeah, come to us with your elderly relative, and we'll sit them down and we will interview and have certain questions and bring out their memories, and then we'll do the work for you, and then we'll create the tool or the kit that you can actually plug in, and off you go. But that could be just totally commercialized, and the whole effort then becomes too simplified, and it's not as honest or as complete as you might want it to be. Our motivations are always at question, and I think we need to, as humans, figure that out too, because too much right now, I think, goes into that side of it. And the things like, I'm a Mac user, I like the ethos of Mac, but it's hugely overpriced. And how do we ever reach the creators of some of these things and say to them, maybe we should bring the price down, or if the price is going to stay high, what chunk of that is actually going to building a better human? And I'm sure they would argue that, oh yeah, we're doing things, we're working on all these things. Like, Facebook is doing brain experiments where they're trying to, get in and recognize what you're thinking and things like that. But I feel their motivation isn't necessarily to create a better human. It's to, get more data. And then they can, economize that data, because they've shown that as a track record, right? And, you are what you are. Very hard to say in one breath, yeah, but we're really interested in humanity, and a chunk of our money is going to that. I'm not sure how much news you would get from Canada, but recently there was a news anchor on one of our national networks who's been a journalist for 30 plus years, and she's the news anchor for a major network. And they recently fired her. And there's all kinds of opinions going around that they fired her because she stopped dyeing her hair. So now she's gray. She was too argumentative to the powers that be. And, we don't know what the truth is, but Bell Canada owns the company. So it's a CTV is the network, Bell Canada owns them. And Bell every year does a push toward mental health. And they have a day where a portion of texting and stuff, the fees that they take, goes toward mental health. And people have been slamming them, saying, well, on the one hand, you're doing this. On the other hand, in practice, you're creating havoc by firing this lady. We like her. The ratings were the highest for the news, so why did you do it? It's a real interesting conflict and juxtaposition of them saying, well, we're doing all these things to promote good health and whatever. But actually, our practice is the exact opposite of that. But further to that, Wendy's, maybe you have Wendy's hamburgers in Spain, I'm not sure.
No.
You don't? Okay, well, it's like a burger chain. And their mascot or their graphic has a young girl in pigtails with red hair. And what they've done in Canada is revisit that logo, and now she's in gray hair. So it's their support for this idea that, it's really interesting as this sort of has bubbled up. And it reveals so many different things, right? Our tensions and differences, and the commercialization again, which is what I'm going for in the whole approach. Why did they do that? Well, technically they did it because they think they can make even more money if they replace the anchor. And whether she was, dyed her hair or not dyed her hair wasn't really relevant. Although many people would argue with me and say, oh, no, that's the reason they fired her, was because they wanted her to keep her hair as black, not gray. And back to conflict, how do we reconcile those things? Because for me, any of the national networks, or not even national networks, because I've worked in media, and media does what it wants to do, but without any feeling at all. Like, they do let people go for all kinds of different reasons, right? And I don't know how we change that, but it's just an interesting thing to see the arguments coming up that way. And back to the idea of AI as an arbitrator, we see that in human practice. I mean, in sports, often the team and the player will go to arbitration, and that's a human being. So I'm thinking of this as a model. So instead of that, you'd go to, so CTV and Lisa Laflamme, who's her name, would go to this black box, and the black box would say, well, the ratings are really high. The public seems to like her. Your resistance to having an honest dialogue about a decision-making on a news item seems a little odd, because you profess to say that, news is important and so on. So our decision is, no, she shouldn't be fired. Would we have accepted that, or would the CTV network execs have accepted that? The interesting side note to this is that they have put the guy who fired her onto a sabbatical. So he's no longer active right now. And talk about just an interesting situation, right? As it's inconsequential, I suppose. It's not a war situation. People aren't dying because of it, but it's a good example, I think, of commercial versus human versus audience. All of it sort of comes together in this one situation. And most people would argue, again, as a communications person, that CTV handled this badly. They didn't give her a chance to say goodbye, for example. It just kind of happened, and etc. But yeah, there's millions of these kind of things happening every day. KT Tunstall, who's a singer-songwriter, I don't know if you've heard of her, but she has a song called Miniature Disasters. And it's like that. This is a miniature disaster. And how do we face those? And to me, if we had, back to the Alexas, if we had this reference point that we could say, well, Alexa, this is the situation I'm in. Talk to me a bit about the historical record of these kind of things and decision making. And, I want to do this, but is it really the best thing to do? You could talk to a human about that, but the human may not have as much data. And also the speed of their being able to draw references. What do you think about that?
I think it's a beautiful idea in concept, but it has a few points that until we solve them, we might face big issues. One is you have to create an oracle that everyone would trust. And how do you do that, right? Because now whoever who created Alexa is Amazon, Google, Meta. People don't trust them. I mean, we know that they are commercial and they don't have, they might have Meta for good, but by no means they are not philanthropic institution and they just want to make money. So if they will be the one to create some sort of an oracle like that, I don't see many people that would trust it. And so maybe the way to do that is to go, instead of a top-down approach, that this big giant company will create this kind of oracle. Maybe we need to have something more decentralized and go bottom-up approach, and something that will involve all the humans in create some sort of an oracle that we can trust. Now, I'm not sure how we can do it, but that might be one way. And the second thing, that goes back to open data. So the problem with open data is company will not share and will not open their data because this is how they make money, right? Twitter, Facebook, Google, they make money from selling your data to advertisement. And so it's like the open source movement 10 years ago. Now, pretty much everything is open source because company found a way how to make money not from the source code. So they have some other way to make money. So until this company will find another way to make money or to commercialize their product that is not selling your data, we will not really have open data. They will probably share some just to look good and just to tick some boxes and make common people happy, but we will not have this very open data culture. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem, because I would love to have some sort of an oracle, or you can call it a wisdom of the crowd kind of thing, that you go and ask any question and get an answer, and that you can trust this answer because it has all the right intention. But how exactly do you do that? Like, if you create something like that that is based on data, we know that data is biased and there are lots of problems around it. And who exactly is going to do that? Because it needs to be done by a body that everyone can trust. Now, another point here is, in a way, we already have it, because even if you take, let's take a simple example, Google Maps, or even any recommendation system. they are just recommendation system. By no means they will not tell you what to do. But when I use Google Maps, I know the way from, let's say, the office to where I live. I do that every day, twice a day. And one day I can use Google Maps and it will tell me a different way. Do you think I will think twice whether to follow it or not? Because in my head, it's like, well, Google knows better, so I will follow it. And there are so many stories of, well, it happened to me a few weeks ago. I was in Iceland and I had a car and I drove somewhere. I wanted to get to some national park. And Google Maps took me to a way that as I drove it, it felt wrong. And it only when I got to the edge of a cliff that I was like, this is not okay. I need to turn back. But it took me a few minutes to even like talk myself out of it and said, from one hand, Google cannot be wrong. But on the other hand, I have some common sense and it doesn't make sense to go that way. It's not even an official pathway. It's dangerous. If I will keep driving, it might be the end of my life. So I turned back, but it got me thinking that how much we trust this system. So in a way, what you are saying, it already exists to an extent, maybe not to a scale that like decision, like really fundamental decision in a country level or decision that affecting in a large scale. Maybe we don't have that, but in our day-to-day life, it happens all the time. There are so many examples, like you go to the bank to take a loan. Do you think it's a human that deciding whether you will get it or not? No, they have an AI system that put all your details and said, okay, this person will high likely pay back this loan or not. And these systems are highly biased towards, let's say, male, working in a certain kind of job and living in certain type of neighborhoods. And nobody really questioned it because, it's like computer says no, and that's it. So, I mean, I don't really have, I think the short-term solution is, I know I talked about how AI is not intelligent and it shouldn't be based on data, which that's my opinion. And it's not, it's a view that I keep holding since many years. But at the same time, I am fully aware that this is what we have now. And until there will be like a paradigm shift and we'll find another way to create AI that is not deep learning, that is not based on big data or any data, we have to do what we can in order to make it less biased or in order to make it more ethical. So that's why I still, there is work to be done in that area, right? Because that's what we have. It's not perfect, but it's the best that we can do now. At the same time, I think there is work to be done to create something that is better. And when we will have that, I'm sure it's not science fiction scenario, we can achieve something that can maybe give us recommendation in a more natural way, something like you described, which will be amazing, right? Imagine any question you have, you go to that oracle and you ask a question and you get the answer. And in a way, this is what machines are good at. They are really good in understanding complex ideas and processing and finding pattern that we cannot do that because our brain capacity, as much as it's amazing, it's limited. So let's let the machine do what they can and to create better humans, as you are suggesting.
Yeah, there's a lot in what you're saying that I'm thinking as you respond. One example of the banking is I retired from the city of Toronto, but I say I didn't retire. Like I didn't retire from work. I'm just not working for the city, and I was able to retire from the city. Um, so anyway, I applied for a credit card at one of our chain stores, and I was rejected. And that's because I put freelancer. I put the income down that I was getting from a pension, but I put freelancer anyway. I was denied, and they don't really tell you why you're denied, but the black box probably saw the word freelancer, and So the next time I applied, about 6 months later, I did put retired right away. Got in, got approved. So yeah, it's hard to game an algorithm sometimes, and I think that's where we need to understand that you're dealing with an algorithm, and hopefully the ethics of these companies will at least allow us to question the black box, that we have some kind of forum. But it looks like that's not really the case. You're denied. That's it. We can't tell you why. The thing denied you. Apply again. And then sorry, go ahead. Oh, you muted yourself there.
Oh, sorry.
That there's that example, and I lost my train of thought on the last thing you said. Oh yeah, the oracle. Yeah, I think that would be good, but as a concept. And it occurred to me that what we're really doing is parenting the AI. So we need to have AI grow up like a kid, and by the time it's fully mature, let's say 21, it would have dealt with a lot of the same situations that we do as we grow up. The interesting thing about humans, again, is our flaws in sometimes of what we learned as we grew up, because it's based on your parents and your surroundings and your teaching and the school you go to. All of that has such an impact, and it goes back to this idea of how do you make it fair and neutral. But it is our challenge as parents of AI, right, to get around that somehow.
So what's even fairness? And you as a parent can teach your kid one thing that you perceive as fair, and some other people will teach something else that they perceive as fair. So that goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Either is one single truth, or maybe not. So I had an interesting chat with a friend about whether we can create real ethical AI, and he was talking about the idea of maybe we can agree about some values that they will be the core of this AI. So at least there will be some value that are the basics, like axioms. And I said, well, I don't think there is such values, because even if you take life, which life in many cultures or religions, to many people, it's probably one of the highest values. But if you think about it, it's not necessarily like a definite value, because what if someone is a serial killer that goes around and kill people? Do you need to save this life? Or what if someone has really miserable life because they have like a disease that they will eventually die and their life here is really bad? Is it really the highest value? So I don't have a strong opinion on that. I'm just saying that even this value that we might think is probably a strong value that we might agree, let's encode an AI that takes human life as a value that you cannot question. I'm not sure it's right.
I think aside from that is too, you can say they're a value. So it's the old, I hate the cliche, but it does make sense. This idea of talking it and not walking it, talk the talk, walk the walk. And open data is another interesting example about that. Virtually every government, at least here, will say, oh yeah, of course we support open data, transparency, open government. But the actual practice of it is they still only open what it is they feel they will help them, not hurt them. So the true transparency just isn't there. So yeah, we could have, it's even like, Charter of Human Rights. There's all kinds of signatories in countries that are on that, but they make exceptions all the time. So I think this is the real challenge. And we may have to have several examples of it that, not to go there then, because it doesn't share your values. So the AI things that you encounter may not share your value system, right? But even then, we still need transparency. And I'm not sure how many countries alone are willing, let alone even within countries. Competition between academic institutions or commercial enterprises, just makes it impossible for them to share what they did. And there's patents and there's all the legal ramifications of duplications. And I mean, this is what China has been knocked on so severely, is just copying everything, right? And illegally copying. However, I found I was able to go to China actually once in 2017. I was able to go to China actually once in 2017, and it was quite eye-opening. It actually influenced why I want to do these presentations, because I felt they were so far ahead. And it was no longer copying. I mean, they were really extending and augmenting and going further, faster. Of course, now some years later, wouldn't want to go to China because of what's going on there. But boy, at that moment, I really felt they were on the cusp of. I was there for an open data conference actually, and China open data. But they really were on the cusp of releasing a lot of data, and it was quite magnificent. All the people I met with were philosophically very similar in why open the data and so on. But then, I guess it's President Xi, is pronounced president or premier. I always get confused. Prime Minister, president, but the big guy at that time wasn't president for life. And since that time, that's how he's navigated the books and the party and so on. So he is, and a lot of his decisions now in China is based on one person. So anyway, yeah, in my view, it's evolved quite differently, but nonetheless, being aware of that, knowing what you'd get in China and what AI would be in China is important to know, right? Just as if you come to Canada, what are we doing? And one of the things I did find in China was, robot waiters, everything was digital. Even what looked like phone booths were charging stations, free wireless. I mean, it was just hugely and the use of QR codes, for example. We tried to do that on the web team years and years ago, probably 2005 or something. Nobody adopted them here. They just didn't take on, right? Yet in China, they were everywhere. And now they're just starting to hit big. And I mean, as big as in China. So how many years is that since something like that, which the people in China just adopted? Like, talk about early adopters. Which I sense anyway is what's going to happen is we'll see things like that. Using my country as we're behind. I don't know if it's because we're generally conservative. We don't take a lot of risks, whereas a place like China obviously is going for it, and that creates interesting things too. Because let's say it's already proof of concept in China. So they know it's successful. I mean, TikTok, I think, is the best example of that, right? It's taken off and it's universally used, and yet there's controversy around it at the same time. But that's, to me, is the key, is these differences that we see, and different ambitions, different financial support. All of it makes a difference in what you create and how it spreads. And somehow we need this kind of idea of one world thinking, although you've made me ponder a little bit about how advantageous it is to keep some of these things separate rather than all in on one world. I also wanted to mention science fiction because some of what you're talking about relates to that. Like Star Trek, I'm a big fan of, have been ever since the early days. And you can turn to its computer, computer, and you get the answer, and it's very relatable, and that's, I think, where we're kind of headed, because maybe we like that, but there are risks attached to that too, because as you say with the map example, right? What if it does happen to be wrong because it's missing something? And you do see that with GPS a lot. I bought a new car recently. It's a Toyota, and it has a mapper system of its own. And they don't update it. Like, it's already 4 years old or something, right? So the tendency is that they don't know roads exist now. So I can only use it for certain things. We recently had our, it's a part of the highway system in the downtown lakeshore that they're actually trying to improve the cosmetic look and feel of the lakeshore. So they've actually teared down some of the highway. And for a time, all of the maps were still saying, well, you take the highway till, but if you followed it, the highway, you'd drop off because there's no longer a highway there. So there's that whole aspect of the accuracy and the speed of getting the information correct. That also relates to open data too, because often you'll release the data set and somebody will start doing something with it. And if you don't refresh the data set or you stop using the data, as in collecting it or whatever, it makes the accuracy of that app or whatever was created by an outside person no longer good. So the challenges all around of what we're talking about, I think, are enormous. And some days you might just go, wow, I just can't get my head around it. And I think that the audiences that I'm seeing is that's part of the issues that they face, right? It's just too big to comprehend. And in some ways they want to trust, they don't trust government for sure, which is interesting. But yeah, they want to buy the thing and they want it to work. And that came out actually in my last session. One of the questions was, well, don't you think it just comes down to us buying the thing and we expect it to work? And I said, yeah, you're probably right. That's what we want. We don't really want to have involved in huge programming issues and setup and stuff. We just want to plug it in or turn it on and have it work.
I mean, there is a lot to unpack in what you said, and it's 3 points that I will keep, and I hope I will not miss anyone. So the first thing about China, I don't want to talk about any politics or anything, but I don't know how much in China is because people really want it, or is because it's been kind of forced by the authorities or power. In China, you have stories of people falling in love with AI or having an AI companion, and that will lead to many other ethical issues. Do they even have rights? Can they get married? I don't even want to start. Now, back to open data. How can you make sure that even the data that they open is, you can trust it? Maybe they edited before, like maybe they took part of the data that they don't want you to know that they have. How can you know? How can you create a system that can verify that what you have is really the original data set and it's not been auditable or anything like that?
I mean, that's very true. I could give you an example, and every time I share this, especially with local people, I still have a lot of connections in the city. And anyway, there was this pilot of our road, King Street, which has a streetcar on it. So there's always issues around transportation and the speed of the streetcar to be able to get through traffic to get to the spots so people can get to where they want to get on time. So they did a pilot where they actually made it illegal to drive on any kind of length of a trip. You had to turn. So basically, you could only go so far and you'd have to turn off of King Street and then you could go up somewhere else and come back down. And they were promising to release the data and so on. And they did and they didn't. When they released data, it was well behind, meaning that like the month was like way earlier, and it was in PDF form. And I was talking with some contacts there who shall remain nameless for their protection, I guess. But they basically said they weren't releasing the data because it wasn't giving them what they wanted. They wanted to prove that it was better this way. And what it was proving is it was more complicated. Businesses were suffering, for example, because cars couldn't come in and park and have a dinner out or whatever. And I thought that was just proof of what you're talking about, right? And it goes to the trust of your government again. And we used to say, and I guess some open data people still say that it does improve trust. If you're releasing the data and it's transparent, it helps show that, yeah, we're revealing this is what we're doing, this is the information, this is the budget, all of that kind of stuff. But when you just see that, back to talking the talk and not walking the walk, that it doesn't get released, or when it's released, it's missing things. Yeah, it really hurts. I call it the 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And I used to feel this when I was the open data lead, that we get a victory of sorts, like, oh, great, a division is finally going to release their data. But then as we start to get it, we would see some gaps in the data and we'd go back to them and they'd say, no, can't have that. And we start talking to them about it. And they might say, well, because it's, people don't understand the context. And we'd say, well, you can give the context, you can provide context. Well, yeah, but they might use it against us. Well, how would they use it against you? Well, they'd say we're doing it wrong. And we would say, well, are you doing it wrong? Wouldn't it be good to know if you're doing it wrong? And if somebody else thought you were doing it wrong, doesn't that create more openness and transparency? And we very seldom won that argument, right? It was, yeah, we just can't take the risk. So you're quite right about all of that. I think it's one of the biggest impediments to open data is just that, this idea that I have it, I collect it, I understand it, I know it. I can't share it because I don't trust that you would know it or be able to do anything with it. So we have to have our view of it, and that's the only view that counts is our view. And it's a really hard thing to break down.
I mean, you can take it one step further. And what if all this data is deep fake and synthetic data? Now, it's really hard even now to detect deep fake. There are some ways, but I'm sure as we go, it will get even more and more sophisticated. And you will not even have the ability to know if it's true or not.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you can just imagine, right? We've already seen it with political figures where you could have let's say on a campaign, a complete fake thing of the person saying something and they never really said it at all. Yeah, no, I know that's really risky. I did want to ask a little bit about your experience too, because going through your bio on LinkedIn, all your jobs have dealt with the kind of things we're talking about, right? Future stuff, AI engineer, really wonderful experience. But then I noticed on your education side, it's mostly law. So I wonder how you got into this from that, and have you been able to use that experience with legal education in AI?
so law was, but my education is computer science. I graduated from computer science when I was very young, and then I wanted to study neuroscience. My dream was to be a neurosurgeon and to understand the human brain, to solve that mystery. So then I got scholarship to computer science, and with computer science, I thought, how can I combine the two? Because the brain is something that fascinates me and still is. It's like this itch that I have every day that I'm trying to figure out, intelligent consciousness, everything that we talk. And then I like the final project at university was some sort of a program to study handwriting, and I couldn't find a way to do it. And then I came across a neural network, and that was the first time that I did machine learning, and nobody called that AI back in the day. So it was a very old book that was explained neural network. But again, I graduated when I was very young, and I got bored, and I was like, okay, I want to study something else. And a friend of mine, she was like, well, I'm going to a law school. Do you want to join? So I just joined. And very fast, I realized that this is the wrong side. I don't want to be in that side because somehow lawyers, they gain joy from fighting, and that's not me. I want to do good. I don't want to fight. So, I have that experience, but to be honest, it is useful in a sense that, like in law, you know what they said, know the law so you know how to go around it. So in a way, it helped me with AI and with machine, that when you know how they work, you don't know how to walk around them. So it's what I said in general about AI, and that goes back to the science fiction, right? The Hollywood did an amazing job in explaining people what AI is, because if you take random people, they will think that AI is Skynet and the Terminator, because this is what they know from the movies. But when you really know how they work, there is no really immediate feel, because we are so far from this kind of AI. It's the AI that we have now is not that. It's something completely different. But people feel what they don't understand. And I think people don't really understand what AI really is. And that's why they're really afraid, and that's why they, you know, I was in the flight a few months ago, and I was talking with a guy that was sitting next to me, and when I talked to him, it was an eye-opener for me to understand how really people are scared from AI, because he was like, and he was a smart guy. He worked in tech in some capacity, and he was like, maybe AI will, we will get to human extinction and it will surpass us, and I will lose my job. Yes, there are some jobs that will disappear, but there is nothing to be afraid of, in a sense that robot will come and destroy humanity. If someone will do it, we will do it ourselves, right? We fight so much. We have crazy people in power position that doing crazy things. So it will not be AI that will get us to human extinction.
That reminds me of, I don't know if you've heard of the comedian George Carlin. He died some years ago, but recently they had a documentary about him, and he was talking about climate change. And he said, the planet is going to be okay. We're the ones who are going to have the problem. I think that's interesting, how you found, what you wanted to do. I mean, I think lots of times, especially younger folks, aren't sure what they want to do and what excites them, and how education influences. And certainly advocating, I am for coding experiences and things like that, so that people get a sense of how these things work. But I do find they don't tend to incorporate them in other classes, right? It's a specific course, right? I'd rather see it integrated somehow in English and history and things like that. But I'm cognizant of time. I did want to ask a bit about your ethics group that you're starting out through your company, Citibeats. It sounds very interesting, and I joined the Slack group, and there's some people there. We haven't got conversations going yet. I've been kind of lurking to see, but what's the deal behind this, and how do you hope it will make things better?
So it goes back to what we talked at first about data and the AI that we have now. So the AI that we have now is based on big data, right? So that's all we have. And if we look at the trends in AI in recent years, it moved from model-centric AI to data-centric AI. That's a movement that came from Stanford, Andrew, and the idea is the main focus was, let's build our model to be better. But now the shift is, let's make sure that the data that we train this model is better, because your model can be very sophisticated, but if the data that it's been trained on is biased, the prediction that your model will do will still be biased, as we call garbage in, garbage out. So there is a whole movement around, let's move from big data to good data. Let's move from model-centric to data-centric. So that's one element. And in Citibeats, one of the biggest promise of our product is that we are ethical, that we process data in an ethical way. And it starts from the way we gather the data, but also what we do with it. So we make sure, as much as we can, that we mitigate biases. But the point is, and that's my view, how can you do it if you're not involving everyone? Because if I am an engineer, I have my own biases, and I can run this model and I can think that it works perfect because I tried with my data. And let's say if it's face recognition, I upload my image and it works perfectly fine. But I cannot possibly know that it doesn't work well from someone else, from some other ethnic minority that I don't have in my data set. So, I can be a big company like Facebook or Google, but I cannot employ everyone to challenge my model. So my idea around that was, and I'm a big advocate for open source, but in that aspect, it wasn't just the open source. It was, we really need to create our model and our AI more ethical. And the only way that you can do it is by opening that to the community. And you open your model and you open your data sets too, so people can come, can test it, and then they can challenge it, and then they can submit a pull request and tell me, your gender identification model doesn't work well with my data. So then I have a way to improve it. But I don't see a way how you can do it, from the garage, where you can have the most brilliant data scientists working on it, but how can you cover, as we talk, all the biases in the world? You need everyone. And I mean, maybe it's also, when we talked about this oracle, right, that will give us the right answer, maybe that's another way to do it. Maybe we don't need some big corporate to create this oracle. Maybe the way to do it is by create some sort of an open source and bring the community and everyone to help us build it, to help us shape it. I mean, I will go back after this call and I will do some homework, because it's really intriguing how we can do something like that. But I think it can be very interesting, because even now you see with this large language model that you have OpenAI and you have DeepMind, they're all releasing this big model, but none of this is open source. So then you have communities like Big Science and Stable Diffusion and some other, they're all building the same thing, but it's open. They have team of researchers that join together and build this thing that will give that is somehow, it's a competition. It's something similar to what they do, but it's open so everyone can see it. And maybe this is a way to go. Maybe this is also the way to have this black box, not so black box, although with deep learning, even as an engineer, you cannot really explain what is going on. But that's another problem.
It is a problem, isn't it, though, in a sense? Yeah, and I find teaching about it is difficult sometimes because it can get so confusing, right? So I tend to stay on the simple side of it, and if people are really interested, they can go further, and somebody else can teach them that. But I like this is what attracted me to the company in that sense, because also you're kind of doing what I believe in, which is asking people, and not just people in the trade. Often, if I go to conventions and stuff, it's a lot of although it's expected. I mean, if you go to a doctor's conference, the doctors are talking in medical terms and stuff like that. But I often wonder how come there's an absence of just folks observing and talking over lunch and coffee with people, so that let's say the data scientists and all of the people investigating and creating get a bit of a sense of the people out there who may be using their creations. So I think we need to bring people closer together to understanding and volunteering their feelings about these things.
And the point is, we need everyone. Having just data scientists is not enough, because if you take only data scientists, that is already a biased group, right? Because data scientists are usually they have some sort of they have a certain degree of academic knowledge, and it is a closed group. And if you want to if you want to at least make your AI less biased, then you need everyone and not just data scientists. So that's also my little criticism around some open source project, because when you go open source, you attract already certain group of people that can understand your code, that they have some sort of understanding in machine learning, in data science, and they know how to deal with that. And that's already biased. So how you can create something that will be open to everyone, and even within the data scientists, you have the top schools data scientists, which, like, you have company, and I don't want to mention name, that if you want to get in, you can only get in if you are from a certain school or if you work in some other companies. So then you create this AI that eventually is in our phone and is in our life, but it's all created by the same group of people. And I think this is a thing that everyone should be worried about, because eventually it's around us. Everything that we do, everywhere we go, there is AI that, in a way, to a certain degree, decide what are we getting and what do we do and what do we read and where do we go. So it has to be accessible to everyone. There has to be a way that everyone, that even without like deep knowledge in machine learning and data science, can access it. And there need to be a standard. So like, even if you think about face recognition, do you know how many face recognition algorithms are around there? Pretty much each company, they are building their own. What if we had one model that everyone uses and everyone has access to it? And if this algorithm, if this model says, for instance, that I cannot go to some place or it didn't recognize me, then I can go and I can test it and I can see that there is an issue and then I can flag it. So I think this is a real transparency. Now maybe I'm daydreaming, maybe I'm very, sometimes I have this tendency to be very naive and just to want to do good and believe in this is what we should do because this is the right way to do it. But it's not commercially viable, right? Because some companies are making money from that. So you are cutting, basically you're cutting their business. So what do we do? Well, the point is, good thing that I am not, this is not my business and I care less about this kind of thing. And I care more about, humanity and do good. And I don't want people to get hurt by this AI.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I want to ask the question, how many times in your life has someone said to you, you're being naive?
Every day.
Yeah, it's interesting because the same thing has happened to me. And I was thinking just recently about that. I want to be naive because I sense that naivete is hope. It's possible. I want to feel that way. So I no longer get upset when someone says you're being naive. I'd rather be naive because I do think it enables you then to think of the possibilities, right? And they can be good possibilities. A lot of the people that I talk to when they say that are saying, oh, no, it is going to do harm. And, I used to be kind of that group too. I was thinking it's all negative. Yeah, we got to watch out, got to worry, alert, alert, alert. But I wanted to do this series in particular as a change around for that, to say, well, what can we take positively out of it? And, we haven't gotten detail about health and AI, but, diagnosis and giving the doctor another interpretation. Sometimes it sees things that the doctor hasn't seen. All of those things I want to emphasize. And I think some of that has come from naivete, because surely some physician somewhere that was helping develop these things, somebody said to him or her, oh, you're being naive. You'll never get a system that can spot better on an x-ray than a human being, And, you wonder how the physician would have taken that. Hopefully they just said, well, so what? I'm going to make it work, right? So I do think it's interesting. And you're one of the first people I've met who has mentioned that, just sort of this idea of naivete. I think that's really interesting. I hope there's more of you and us out there that I just haven't encountered yet, because I think we're going to need
I don't
that.
want to lose my naivety. Never. Because first, I think that's what makes you dream and really go after your dreams. And it is interesting that you also mentioned that. And I think it comes with, once you are aware of it, then in a sense, in the business world that we have now, it can be a weakness. But if you know it, you just know where to position yourself, And then, so I'm detaching myself from the commercial side, because I know that as soon as I go to that hole, I can lose this naivety.
Naivete, yeah. Yeah.
But I don't want to lose it, because then I will stop dreaming and I will stop hoping and I will stop trying. Now, I might be completely wrong with this ethical AI community and with trying to create the real somehow standard for ethical AI. I might be wrong, I don't know, but I know that there are way too many ethics committee and frameworks and paper and people just doing the talk, but less of actual work and people that walk in the walk, as you say. So I'd much rather be in this side and find out that I failed or that it's wrong or it's not the way to go than just talk, because talk is easy.
Yeah, talk is cheap. That's what I say. I think, yeah, I like to hear that. And I think that even on the commercial side, sometimes it's good to have that voice. What if? And they may slam it down, well, it's not economically viable, but at least it's a voice. And I think the idea of having that voice is really important. So yeah, I would try to stay in on the commercial side at some point and see if you can introduce the concept or the dream. And I just think it is fascinating how there is a culture of tech and a culture of AI that's been developed, and it's kind of like I love that word ethos, and you can sense it, and that's true of anything. Musicians, it's a bit of a cult to break through almost any level, and if you do break through, does that mean you've sold out or you've compromised? It's really intriguing to me. I think as a workplace, if you like, around AI, and the ability to lump almost everything into AI. Like you've talked about artificial general intelligence, and there's just so many things that are confused as AI, but they're not necessarily AI in the robot sense and things like that. So it's such an interesting field to investigate, to me anyway, because of its many layers, and the possibilities are both potentially fantastic, and also there is that dark side to it too. So yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, we're almost at 10:35. I don't know what your day is like. I don't want to monopolize your time, but I've really enjoyed talking to you. I hope we can do it again.
Yes, I'd love that. I mean, there is so much to unpack, but what you do is really amazing, and I wish more people would do that, because there is a lot of spreading fear and misinformation around AI, but there is also truth to be said, and I think this is what you are doing, and it's great.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you for saying.
The
And
point
vice
is,
versa.
yeah.
I mean, I think your posts on LinkedIn have been really intriguing. I mean, they've inspired me to add some things that I hadn't thought about, and I think that's great. That's why interacting with people, I think, is so important. And the approach to talking about it is good too, because then, now I can reference. In fact, I'm recording this, so I'll probably use a clip on one of my sessions, if that's okay. And continue, because I love meeting people in the trade, that we can talk like this, because I think it's good. It's outside of a convention. It's this having to go to another session, and you run out of time. Like, this has been really fabulous and stuff. So I'll continue to follow your articles and comment occasionally as well. I think it's fabulous, and I think you're doing good work that way. And I think you're well situated in your company. I think you mentioned somewhere how you really moved. You changed your whole place of living to go to this company, right?
I have. Yeah. So, we live one life, and I have this. One of the books that really changed my life was Ken Robinson, which sadly passed away beginning of COVID. Sir Ken Robinson. He's talking about creativity in children in general, like his brilliant TED Talks. But one of the things that he's talking about is find your element. And like finding your element is that thing that really doesn't, like, you go to sleep and you want to wake up because you want to do that thing. And I know very quickly when I lose it. So if I don't do something that I truly believe, then I leave. And I change country. I move, basically I moved country, and I left a company that I founded behind because I really wanted to do it. And when I met the people in Citibeats, I think it was because I've been in the tech world for a very long time. I mean, since I'm very young, when I was at school, and it's not every day that you find people that are very much mission driven, and they will say no to our potential customers or potential collaboration just because it doesn't align with our value. And when I see something like that, I was like, okay, these are the people that I want to work with, because like their mission and their vision really align with what I'm trying to do. And yeah, so that's why I moved, and I hope um really hope we can change it. I mean, that's maybe a talk for another time. My dream for 5 to 10 years from now is very crazy, but that's probably for another time.
Okay. Yeah, I anticipate hearing about that at some point. Yeah, I think you're right on. We've got to find something that's fulfilling and also is doing something. When I first graduated I went to radio, TV, art, so I learned all about broadcasting and stuff. And my goal was to get into television and not so much on camera, but making TV shows. And I did. I made that with a show. It was called Strange But True, and it was a really good experience, but also a bad experience because the outcome wasn't really satisfying. It was just a somewhat poorly made reality show. And I decided at that point that's not what I wanted to do. So I investigated more corporate work, still with video. But then I found in the corporations that I was dealing with, sales meetings and things like that, I was hearing things like, oh, this costs us 2 cents to make and we're selling it for $5. And I was starting to add up the figures and what they're paying their employees in the various countries that they're using as labor and stuff. And I thought, I don't really want to support that. So I ended up getting a job in public health, which was government, but that really made a difference. I felt, yeah, I'm finally doing something that's I felt was worthwhile, at least in a messaging, again, as a communications person and so on. So that's what put me in that direction. And it's interesting when you find something that is satisfying, how it can make such a difference about going into work for it, right? Rather than just phoning it in, there's some reality to it. Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your dream with like building better human? What's the ideal ultimate goal?
That's a good question. I don't know if I can answer that yet. Because I'm formulating it as I go, which is kind of the first time I've done that. Usually the sessions I've done, I've had a lot more knowledge about the different aspects of it, right? So this time I'm really investigating as I create the hour presentation. So it's as current as I can think of, right? Because obviously I'm finding things every day that I thought, yeah, this would be worth talking about. I think though, I'm thinking of it more from an audience perspective rather than my own goal. My goal is for that audience to start to ponder this stuff and make it more conversation for them. I attended this thing last night, and he was talking about this. What do you think about that? So talking to their kids or even bringing it to teachers or having teachers bring it to their students, just create as much momentum as I could possibly create with doing it this way so that there is more discussion about it. I'd be really happy if, let's say, and in fact, the last session I had 50 people attend, which was great. If out of that 50, if even 10 or even 2 started to investigate more than they would have, that would be success enough for me. But my own personal goal with it, I would really like to see the approach be less consumer driven in the sense of making money and realizing that, that's only as good as it is. Like you can't take it with you. I mean, I guess you can try, but when you die, right? So even the push toward climate and how a lot of the gas and oil companies have been resistive, they got to think ahead, right? And I would like to think that they will think ahead. Eventually, we are going to see replacements for gasoline and not just electricity, but corn oil, because we have enough intelligence to do it, right? It's just, can we do it? So to me, and I don't know if I'll be alive actually, though, when it happens. I wish that
Maybe
that would
you
be
will
the
live
case.
forever. Maybe we will
Yeah,
upload your brain.
that's it. My digital self will see it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I'd like to think we won't annihilate ourselves. I want to go back with hope that that there will be a breakthrough. And I'm not sure what it would be, but I do hope that in some way AI inspires the breakthrough, because we are investigating it. We're investigating the brain. We're investigating all of it that makes us tick. And in some cases to put it to AI, but in just other cases to investigate for health, right? For our own health, aside from AI. So I think, yeah, at some point we may stumble on the thing that we're missing that differentiates us enough from the animals that do fight just out of survival and stuff. So to me, the biggest risk to us is this killing each other thing, right? The urge to take ownership and I have to be superior. I have to own it, and we don't really own it anyway. If you think about it. So that's, yeah. I have to formulate an elevator answer for that, though, that I can answer in an elevator in 30
So
seconds.
you want to answer the question, what makes us human and what differentiates human from AI?
Yeah, and how we can, again, create what we create to that advantage as humans. It's not really advantageous for us if we create a bigger, smarter other being, because then the chances are we are going to lose our own sense and we will be overruled by them and or its or whatever we want to call it, right? Yeah, I think we have to be careful, but we could use it to our advantage if we just make it towards our advantage, let it help us be better.
Yeah. There is the hard problem of consciousness. I would say that this is a hard problem of humanity or AI.
Yeah, and if it becomes conscious, what does that mean? That goes to this idea again of it perhaps wanting to control us. Okay, if it has emotions, if it has the same urges and tendencies we as humans have, it probably will want territory and I'm a better AI than you as another AI, however they want to communicate. So then they'd be fighting against themselves. I mean, yeah, that would be bad. We don't want to go there. So whatever consciousness is needed is okay, but do we really want it to be totally fiercely independent? Some may say we should do that because that's the kind thing to do, but I don't know. Yeah, why? Let it assist us in driving, but does it really have to drive? We haven't even talked about that. The car that I bought has some of those features. It's not fully independent, but it will drive itself, like on cruise control. And that feels really weird to me as well. And you do get an alert saying, put your hands back on the wheel. But it's moving toward this idea. And they also have, as part of the app, it's a Toyota. And I know insurance companies are doing this too, where you can track your driving. So if you drive fast, corner fast, harsh braking. What I found it was missing was context, though. Because, if I'm harsh braking because I'm not attentive, that's one thing. But what if, something just darts out, right? I had no control over that. I was aware because I saw it dart out. I have to harsh brake. Were I not to do that, I would run into it. So I don't get good points for that, though, again, because they're missing the context. So yeah, it's got a long way to go, I think, before it really is valuable data for everyone, myself included. Because right now it's just punishing me for harsh brake, bad.
Yeah, the AI that we have now doesn't have understanding. So we still have a long way to go. And I don't think deep learning is the answer, but that's a whole different debate and a whole different topic.
Do you put a date on when some of this is going to happen? Like people use singularity as a time. And I've heard everything from 2029 to beyond that.
2040, and 2029 was Elon Musk. 2040 was what's his name? I always forget.
I forget too.
Personally, I don't think that singularity is a point in time. It's like asking someone when, either a moment that you get old. It's not a moment in time, it's a process, right? So I don't think that singularity is one day you wake up and there is this event and that is singularity. I think it's a process which we might already be in that process.
I like that answer because it reminds me of usually John Lennon is attributed to it, and I'm not sure if he took it from somebody, but it was in a song. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. And that's what it reminds me of. You're saying, yeah, we're not going to wake up, boom. It's more like, geez, over the last several years, look at where we are now.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I think. There's different opinion, different people putting dates. I don't want to put a date. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right, well, I'm going to let you go. Let's try to do it again. And, as things come up, maybe there'll be a good reason to talk. Maybe you'll get involved in something with Go Open Data too. I think you were talking to Yuri. Or...
Yes, I very much want that. I'm still trying to think what's the best way to collaborate, because we are now working on a very interesting open data initiative, which maybe I can share with you some slides around it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, I hope you have a great day and a great month. And, down the line, we'll talk again. And certainly we can communicate through LinkedIn and so on. I really appreciate you taking your time. It's been wonderful. Had a great time.
Thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed it.
Have a great day, as I say.
Yeah.
And, much success.
Enjoy your day.
Yeah. Thanks. See ya. Bye.